This is the Overton Pod. Hello, Kanthan.
And hello, Jonathan.
How are you?
I'm fit and fabulous. I think maybe I should end up closing the door. What do you think?
I think a door closure would be a good idea. We're waiting for a glass of water for you. So
That's right, because I'm old and decrepit. And,
yes, exactly. Your vocal cords are basically made of dust at this point, and they could fall apart at any point.
Give myself 10 years and I'll be a candidate for president of the United States.
You will indeed be a candidate
Sorry,
in
20
10 years'
What
time.
am I saying? 20 years.
Sure.
Jeez.
Are you that far back? So you're the same age as Kamala?
Kamala's slightly younger than I.
Yeah, slightly.
Yes,
she doesn't look it, though. I mean,
Yeah, so I'm the same age as Obama
okay.
and George Clooney. And,
Okay. George Clooney, the guy who lied to fundraise $30 million, and then 2 weeks later said that the guy he raised $30 million for, who he expressed utter confidence in, was actually a decrepit senile old man.
I think this is an interesting point that we'll get to shortly.
Yes, we need to get to. Okay, so look, you've put out a call for questions on social media, and some have come through.
Yes.
Some I think we'll get to either today or on another podcast. Some.
Well, certainly
You know.
the US stuff we can touch on today.
Yeah, so I think
that is quite opposite.
I think there's
discussion.
just so much, right? There's a lot that's happened there. I think here comes your water. That's
Awesome.
amazing. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you kindly.
We need to really talk about that because the last podcast was recorded a couple of days before the assassination attempt on Trump. And so we haven't discussed that, but it's been quite a 10 days in the United States. And I think, this does matter. It's the American election. I have obviously great interests, as I've expressed previously on the show. I have great interest in American politics, but it matters to the world because it matters who's the president of the United States. It matters that that country is kind of being run in some direction. Even if you disagree on the direction, it matters that there's control and directed power because it is a very powerful country. And at the moment, that doesn't seem to have been happening, certainly not recently, and in my opinion, not for the last about 3 years. It's control by committee. But there's a lot that's gone on. So we've got the assassination attempt of Trump and everything that comes off that, which we must talk about. We then have Biden allegedly being diagnosed with COVID, the thing that nobody gets sick from anymore. Suddenly he's very sick from COVID. Just on the face of that looks like bullshit. And then he disappears. And while he's gone, he suddenly resigns from his nomination.
Via Twitter, via
X, the platform that the Washington Post said would be dead within a month after Elon Musk bought it. So there's a lot here. So let's unpack it. Let's go sort of chronologically as best as we can. I know for us that might be difficult. But the assassination attempt on Trump, should we start there? Where were you when you first heard about the assassination attempt on Trump?
So this is going to be the seminal moment of the next generation, I think. So, when I was a kid, it was, where were you when JFK was
shot.
assassinated? Yeah. So I was 2 years old at the time, so I couldn't really tell you that. But then, of course, the next one was where were you when the Twin Towers was hit?
Yes.
And I think that this is in every way as much of a seminal moment as those two were at those particular points in history. And
Do you think it's going to have that much of an effect?
I think that it certainly has already to a large extent. And it's certainly from the perspective of the memes that have been generated. The memes, the T-shirts, just the paraphernalia in general.
And perhaps a shift in support, because I feel as if, and this feeling is not just my feeling, it's based on some polling from the United States. So firstly, Donald Trump got a 5-point bump in the polls post that assassination, which is massive. Even though he's been beating Biden, he's only ever been polling around 47% of the population being intent on voting for him in polls in this particular election. And now he's bumped to 52. Now that's going to come down for all the reasons we're going to discuss, but that's a massive jump. That is huge. And what also is interesting is I pay attention to some people who monitor the things that happen on TikTok, for example, which is really where the youth are spending a lot of their time, where their eyeballs are. And post that assassination, there was an incredible amount of pro-Donald Trump content on TikTok being produced by, youngsters. And I think wherever you stand on Donald Trump, and look, this is the Overton pod, so we're not going to stand in the typical. If you watch CNN and you believe what they say about Donald Trump, then you tuned in probably to the right show, but you need to just shut up for about an hour and listen. The thing is that there just seemed to be a shift in the view of Trump. That assassination attempt changed the view of him personally, I think, because of all that transpired in those few moments, but also because outside of him, that was an incredibly so-called American moment. How Americans like to sell themselves: patriotic, courageous.
A particular segment of America who happen to be not Democrat voters.
Sure,
because the concept of having the American flag is now in Democrat quarters often regarded as a symbol of white supremacy.
Yes, but with Gen Z, who are starting to reject the mainstream, right, as youngsters always will do, they'll reject whatever the mainstream view is because Khan's culture, that's what it is.
Which is the reason why they support Palestine.
Some of them do, some of them don't. I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out over time. Gen Z is not unique, inverted commas, in supporting Palestine or Hamas more specifically, because that's what they've openly said they support. Every generation before this has supported Palestine or Hamas. There were protests 20 years ago supporting Yasser Arafat before his death. So, that's nothing new on college campuses, frankly. The center of power.
Okay, so I just wanted to point out that your suggestion that a generation rejects the mainstream is not necessarily...
No. It is. Israel's been the mainstream.
Yeah. Sure.
For America has been allies with that country for 60 years. That's the mainstream.
Yeah. So to get back to your point, TikTok videos that have been suddenly having an uptick, so to speak, in terms of positive content revolving around Trump and that kind of stuff. So where do you want to start?
Well, the assassination attempt. Let's start on this assassination attempt because there's been a lot said about it.
So I don't think there's much that we can throw in terms of information that people have not already had access to.
I think there's a fortune.
So I'd prefer actually stepping back at this point. And so there's a couple of things that immediately come out that made this really significant. The most important thing, I think, that came out of this is that for the first time, because of the sheer volume of people who were present on the ground, who had access to their own devices and their own way of documenting the event, that it made it impossible for anyone in the state to actually spin this in a way that could have allowed them to leave unanswered questions. So contrast this with the JFK assassination.
Sure.
Okay, which had a very defined narrative. And to this day, we still have lots of stuff that's classified that has never made it into the light of day. Mm-hmm. And Trump has promised that if he regains the presidency, he will declassify.
He hasn't actually promised that this time around.
Well,
he promised it last time round.
No. This time round, he did. He was put on the spot about that prior to his assassination attempt, and he said, "I know I said I'd do it last time round, but this time round, I think it's something that we really need to do." But put that aside. The crucial thing is that because of the sheer volume of people who were on the ground, who had their own devices, and were actually keeping a video record of what was going on concurrently with what was coming off the TV cameras, it made it really difficult for information that could have been spun by the director of the Secret Service to not make it into the public eye. So,
Okay, so given that, what you've just said, you don't want to discuss it too much. So then just give me 2 sentences based on all the information we all have that you think we have this extra information.
So the extra...
what actually happened, Kanthan?
So what actually happened was that there was a shooter who was on the roof in plain sight of the Secret Service, and they did not take the shot, even though this person had line of sight directly to Donald Trump.
Simple as that.
It's as simple as that. So the questions that have not been answered is, was it the situation that the snipers working for the Secret Service had the ability to take a shot and an order was given to them to stand down? Was there evidence that there was a credible threat to Donald Trump and they were given the instruction to not act upon it? So protocol in this particular situation would have been, if there was a sense of a threat, the Secret Service was meant to immediately remove Trump from the stage until such time as the threat was eliminated. Now, we don't have access to this information for a number of reasons. The main reason is the head of the Secret Service basically refused to make that information available. So all of the audio recordings of the discussions going on between the Secret Service, because remember, all of this stuff is recorded.
She said in her testimony that it's gone.
Yes, she said in her testimony that it's gone. Or she said, I don't have any information, I'll have to get back to you. So it was trying to obscure it in every conceivable way. But to my point, the fact that the Secret Service were in fact made aware of what was going on became very clear from the fact that you had people on the ground who were reporting on their engagement with various law enforcement officials, pointing out that there was this person on the roof that looked suspicious and no action was taken. So the shift, the significant shift from our perspective is that the ability of the state to actually cover up any possibility that there has been any foul play on their part has been dramatically reduced. So a lot of the evidence has clearly been destroyed because all of the recordings have been destroyed, transcripts have been destroyed. No doubt we've had a situation where the actual snipers who took the shots have been given instructions to not speak directly to any of the people involved. So there's definitely going to be a cover-up. Fascinating thing, of course, is that through access to publicly held data from cell phone towers and so forth, there has now been an indication that the shooter had contact with people over the previous week prior to the shooting, who then made trips up to Washington, D.C., and who then made trips up to Massachusetts. And also made, and the same people also made trips to the people who actually were responsible for selling the firearms to the firearms shop. And all of this has been sourced simply based on the fact of tackling cell phone records and tapping into that to get a sense of whether the shooter was acting alone, whether the shooter was a lone wolf. So everything that we've seen so far based on crowdsourced information, and this is the crucial thing that I'm getting at, means that the ability of the state to actually try and cover up any possibility that there was an attempt from within the state itself to take out the front runner for the presidency, it's going to be damn near impossible for them to ignore it.
Okay, let me disagree with you. So all of that stuff you said is true.
Are you going to disagree with me based on what I've just said?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. True. Most of the stuff you said is true. Unfortunately, there's a whole bunch of extra information over and above that which disputes the single shooter theory. Unfortunately, I am very much on the single shooter theory side of the fence. But unfortunately, the former Secret Service director went to Congress and testified and refused to answer simple questions like how many shell casings were on the roof. Then someone went to the actual site, and it's been testified that the Secret Service were in the building where the shooter was. That building is like a warehouse level, where is the roof he was on top of. And then above that, there's an office which overlooks that roof that he was on, with giant windows that open. And the Secret Service were in a boardroom overlooking that roof, so they would have seen the man climbing onto the roof. They could have shot him with a normal 9mm pistol. That's how close they would have been, and they didn't. So there's that kind of information, which now makes it very strange. That the single shooter argument becomes a bit weird, because it's why they're covering up all the stuff that makes single shooter obvious, why they're trying to hide something else. She won't answer questions about the water tower, which is one of the conspiracy theories. Why not answer that question? Why not just say there was no one on the water, or it was our people on the water tower, or whatever it was? So there's that. There's over and above that, the gun range you talk about is actually a training area for Department of Homeland Security staff.
Correct.
So it is it's a site that's used by government people for training. So we have a 20-year-old who tried to join the shooting club at his school a few years ago, not being allowed to join because he was such a bad shot. Now taking a shot at the former president and probably future president, and missing him by probably 3 centimeters.
So I'm inclined to go with the two-shooter theory.
Okay. So I'm just saying that there's a lot of stuff here. And if you were to go today and you were to go to any normie news station, paper, or person who just, that's where they get the information, all right? They would tell you that you're insane. There was one shooter and he was killed. They would also tell you that 30% of Democrats, 30 to 35% of Democrats would tell you, and that means several, I can tell you I spoke to several South Africans, just normal people, colleagues, people you work around, like random people.
So my point is, I'm not concerned about what people
think.
Okay,
but you're talking about a cover-up, so let me finish my point.
All right.
Right, so my point is this. You're saying there's a whole bunch of people. I am concerned with what those people think, because
just cover up was your words.
Okay. You said cover up several times.
I said it's really difficult for there to be a cover up.
Okay.
I'm not suggesting that there is a cover up.
Okay, so I am suggesting there's a cover up, because the evidence points to a cover up. You don't hide basic, simple evidence if you're not trying to cover something up. You don't, and I'll get to what I believe are the options, because when you talk about a cover up, it could be many things. It could be a direct attempt, it could be negligence. But the point is many people believe that the assassination attempt didn't even happen, it was a setup. You go talk to, in the days following, when there were the photos of the man with blood on his face, I got told by lots of people in this country, for example, and they know Donald Trump there was an incident. They know that there was an incident because of the news media. Otherwise, they wouldn't even know Donald Trump exists. Okay? They know that there was an incident as a result, and they get their decision-making based on that news media. And so you've got about a third of people believing that this didn't even happen.
You're spending a lot of time on what people think, and
Yes.
I'd like to focus on what was actually happening.
It's irrelevant what actually happened, because what happens and what people think, what people think is what drives narrative, and narrative is reality. And
So are we going to be talking about what the outcomes are going to be, or
we'll get to outcomes, but I really, really want to. So you must remember there will be people watching this show who've never heard what we've just discussed. They've never heard the point you made about the cell phone towers. They don't know that, because you spend a lot of time looking for this information, and you're on X, for example, where this information is freely shared. And they would never have heard that piece of information about the Secret Service having direct sight a few meters from the roof where the shooter was. They don't know the information about the shooting range. They've never heard the two-shooter theory. Okay, it's important to make these points, because it's not about spreading conspiracy theories. It's about saying this is the information that's available. You can take those pieces of information and come to various conclusions. Now, we don't know, and this is the issue you're pointing out, where there's a lot of information extra because it's not just controlled by the news media. But what I'm pointing out is that there is a cover-up, and as far as I'm concerned, of some sort. What it's covering up, who knows? But there is a cover-up, and unfortunately, the news media will control that narrative 100%.
And I'm saying they don't because of the fact that you now have...
They maybe don't, but...
all of this crowdsourced information.
Yeah.
It's made it onto YouTube, it's made it onto TikTok, and of course, it's made it onto X.
And it won't matter, because just like January 6th, most people believe was actually an insurrection when it wasn't. Just like most people
No,
believe...
again, it's not most people. And again, it goes back to the fact that this is on the basis of the mainstream media has a very shrinking base, and their ability to actually influence the discussion is nowhere near what it would have been.
I agree, it's diminished.
Even 5 years ago. But let's go back to the question of the shooting and the issues that went down. Here's why I'm favoring a two-shooter theory. If you look in the context of where the shots actually landed, because remember that there was the shot that took out the fire chief and the shot that took out, and the shots that took out two other people who were wounded, who were nowhere near where Trump was. So, my take on this is that those people were taken out by the 20-year-old because of the fact that he wasn't a professional. So, my take on this is that the second shooter waited for him to take the shot first, because remember, the first rule of assassination is to kill the assassin. So they could only kill the assassin if the assassin had taken a shot first. Okay, so the shot...
well, they could have killed him before. They chose not to.
No, but if they killed him before, then there would not have been any evidence.
You're talking about assuming there was a conspiracy to kill Donald Trump.
Correct.
By the state or by some group.
By some group. Okay, I'm not suggesting necessarily that it's by the state,
Sure.
but certainly by some group. If the shooter had not gotten the first shot out of the way, they would have taken him out and come there and found a gun that had not been fired. Okay, so the slew of shots that then took out the people in the crowd was the opportunity to take the shot directly against Donald Trump, where fortuitously, and if you look in terms of the way in which this thing played out, it just so happened that at the last split instant, he ended up turning his head, and the bullet, which otherwise would have taken him square, and we wouldn't be having this conversation now.
A different conversation.
Different conversation. But that was the missed opportunity on the part of what I believe was the real shooter who was trying to take him out.
Why would a professional miss?
The professional didn't miss. The professional was dead on. But remember that the professional was dead on the assumption that Donald Trump was going to be there for the next split instant. And Donald Trump turned.
And he only took one shot? He didn't take a second or a third?
No, but immediately after he took that shot, was there an ability to immediately line up based on what was happening? Because remember that they then piled on him and dragged him down almost immediately. So it was really difficult to be able to pull this off.
I'm still personally... So I'm personally still on a single shooter narrative, but I said to people...
I don't believe this 20-year-old had the capacity to make use of of a rangefinder. So he didn't have a scope on the rifle. He had a rangefinder.
No, he had a scope. No, there was a scope as well.
No,
there's a red dot scope on the rifle.
There was not a red dot scope.
100%
from all of
there
the
was.
reporting that I've seen.
I promise there was a red dot scope on the rifle. But the point is and in fact... in the hearings with the Secret Service director, one of the Congress people he asked her some questions, but he more gave testimony in which he said that he owns an AR-15. He put a scope similar to that of the shooter on the... look, you couldn't, from that distance without a scope, you're not hitting anything. Okay, with any accuracy.
No, actually, you can, because and there's been testimony to that effect as well. Because basically,
Okay.
He did have a rangefinder, and the rangefinder did allow him to get a
No, the
a
rangefinder.
distance.
Yes, it allows you to get a distance, but when you're holding the rifle, and your vision is 150 meters out, is roughly the distance, 120, something like that. You are not going to get an accurate shot with your eyes on that distance with any rifle. You do need. I mean, you'll get in the ballpark, obviously, but you will improve your accuracy and precision greatly with a scope. Anyway, my understanding, what I've seen is that he had a scope. The congressman gave testimony to the effect that he hasn't fired his AR-15 in many years. He's not a great shot, but he has one. And following what happened to Donald Trump, he went the next weekend and he set up the same scenario. Same distance, AR-15, basic sort of scope on the AR-15, and he shot at a target. And he hit the target 94% of the time. So I don't buy this guy couldn't have. I think it's entirely possible, especially if he was practicing. We know he was practicing in a range. We know he was practicing in a range with people who know things.
What's your explanation as to why then he suddenly swung around and hit people in the crowd?
So, firstly, at least one of the people who was hit was basically in line with Trump. So, past Trump, but down that way. So, in other words, you shot at him, missed him, and that bullet then hit.
You're saying behind Trump?
Behind to Trump's left, to crowd right, and that was where the one guy got hit in the stands. I haven't seen good reporting of where the other two got hit, which is another thing that is weird. The other thing is we don't know the other two people's names. And we know the guy who died. Why don't we know the other two people who were injured? I mean, allegedly.
Well, Trump does because he visited them in hospital.
Okay, but allegedly there's been a big fundraiser for them. Big, huge, millions.
For him and for the family of the fire chief who died.
Yes, yeah. So for the three, there was a give, send, go, or whatever it was, and so we don't know any of that information. I haven't seen good information. I've seen a lot of conspiratorial information, and that's not to downplay it. But the problem is when I see a map from one account on X and another map from another account on X, and they both have these were the injured people in different places. It's like, okay, guys, well, who's right here? And it would be great if we could get some real information. Again, a cover-up is definitely happening because that information should just be available from the FBI or the Secret Service. So, look, I think there will be all of these theories, and there is some data, certainly, to support your theory. I think there's also data to support my theory. I don't know what the actual truth is because to me, there's data points going both ways.
So let's move out of the theoretical framework and let's look at what subsequently transpired. So a couple of days later, Trump, with a bandage on his ear, pitches up at the Republican National Convention.
Yeah, 48 hours later.
Yeah, and certainly gave, I think, in his closing address, probably the most conventionally presidential speech that he's ever given.
For the first 40 minutes, yes.
Yes, yeah, which was basically an appeal for unity and that he's planning to be a president for everyone, all Americans, and all of that kind of stuff. But I think that it was all consistent with a guy who has had a near-death experience, and he spoke about it very emotionally.
Whether that was scripted or whether that was him, it was brilliant speech writing.
I think the thing about Trump is that we know that he's better at speaking off the cuff than just about any politician.
Which is why I actually didn't enjoy that speech.
Right.
Except for that part where he describes what happened.
Yes. So, but I don't think it's for us to enjoy the speech or not, because the question really is, what has been happening in that very short space of time? So let's just pull back a bit now and consider that if Trump had been taken out.
Right. So this is where the interest is.
If Trump had been taken out, the entire scenario in terms of the elections later this year would have been completely up for grabs.
Let me go one step further. So it's Trump's last rally before the Republican National Convention. Trump hasn't yet announced his vice president candidate. So the ticket is only Trump at that point.
Correct.
By electoral law.
Yes.
Right. So now, let's say you buy into because remember, I think both of us are
So
on
they're
the...
able to field a deep state candidate.
Well, both of us
at
are on the
RNC.
page that at minimum it was negligence, complete criminal negligence on the part of the Secret Service to not protect Trump properly. Or it was actually some sort of three-letter agency tried to actually take him out. Now, assuming you buy the three-letter agency tried to take him out part, if they succeeded, Trump's no longer top of the ticket. Who came second in the Republican primary, Kanthan?
That would be Nikki Haley.
That would be Nikki Haley, the preferred
Hence my point,
candidate
yes,
of the deep
Of
state.
the deep state, absolutely.
And so what would have happened at the Republican National Convention? Look, you can't fully predict because Trump supporters obviously would have gone to the Republican National Convention and may very well have pushed to nominate a candidate in Trump's likeness following his assassination.
Which they would not have had at that particular point, just simply because of the fact that Trump had not yet named his
Because
successor.
Trump gave no one the nod,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, at that
And so you very likely would have ended up with Nikki Haley
as president.
as the presidential nominee,
Yes.
right? Running against Joseph Biden. And in that case, in my opinion, the people who inverted commas run the American government. So
Would have been very happy with Nikki
And
Haley.
let me just also say, this isn't a conspiracy. I'm saying that there are people in the American government who have worked in that government for 40 to 50 years. The idea that someone who becomes president for 4 years or 8 years has control at the level of someone who's been in the CIA for 40 years, for example, is laughable. And that's what the deep state is. And so, yeah, they wouldn't have cared whether Nikki Haley or Joe Biden won. That wouldn't have been a big deal either way, because both of those candidates would have been rah-rah war in Ukraine. Both of those candidates...
Yeah, rah-rah war in Ukraine, rah-rah war in Taiwan.
Yeah,
and,
and also, all the other stuff that comes along with it, lying to the public about where we develop viruses and
Sure.
all of these things.
So to swing back now.
Yes.
And so suddenly what you have is Trump actually delivers probably the most significant Republican National Convention that's occurred in...
Well, the convention was very well done.
In modern history. I mean, it was superbly choreographed.
Yes. That's the word.
The interesting thing was that Trump took complete charge of every single thing that was going down there. So all of the touch points that were needed to be focused on, he had already rehearsed ahead of it. So everyone who was to speak there was called in for a session with Trump, and all of this is documented. There's multiple sources to this. And they were told, here are the touch points that we are going to speak to. So there are some topics that are not going to be raised. So we're not going to be talking about abortion as a very specific example. As far as we're concerned, we've done the job of handing decisions on abortion back to the states.
Yeah. Roe versus Wade.
Yeah. And and we're not taking it further because it is up to the states to now litigate it, and we are not taking a position as national government on this. And it's very clear that we're not going to be passing a federal abortion ban, so we're not going to be having any discussions around this. So by the time every single person went up on stage, it just ended up being flowing so smoothly, and the responses from the crowd was, absolutely on point. It created this impression of an America that actually knew what it was doing.
And consensus.
Yes.
Group consensus.
Group consensus, yes. So, and now on the back of that, let's say for the first time, you actually had the masses paying attention to what was going down there. And you look in terms of the number of TikTok videos that flowed just from sound bites from that particular space. He announces J.D. Vance. Immediately there's a outpouring of support from people that you would not otherwise expect support from. So the tech community, for example, rates J.D. Vance very highly. Why? Because J.D. Vance happens to be friends with Peter Thiel.
Yeah, he's a venture capitalist.
Yes, he's a venture capitalist, and at the same time, JD Vance is very bullish on crypto, as an example, and he's very bullish on actually giving the tech community, opportunities to be doing really interesting things, as opposed to the untrammeled regulation that you had under the Biden administration. At the same time, on the question of calling JD Vance a racist, well, he happens to be married to an Indian American, and they have biracial children, and it becomes really difficult to refer to him as a racist.
He's also. Let's talk about that choice briefly, because I think it's an interesting one. He had. It appears as if it came down to three candidates that were the sort of finalists, so to speak. One was J.D. Vance. He was actually leaning more towards Doug Burgum, who's a billionaire governor. And, I think Trump probably feels some sort of attraction there in terms of that Doug Burgum's a self-made billionaire. And, Trump sees himself in a similar light. And then probably, I don't know what you heard, but, as an outside sort of chance, someone like Tim Scott was still sort of in the mix, so to speak. Now, it does appear that a lot changed after that assassination. So if you think that assassination was a true attempt by someone trying to affect politics, trying to take Trump out, it did affect politics in an opposite direction, which is that so something that was said in following the assassination is Trump needs to pick someone that makes him assassination proof. So it has to be someone that if they kill Trump, they get worse than Trump. And so that argument seemed to have sway. It does seem that his kids, Don Jr. and Eric, are both friends with JD and pushed very strongly for JD. But let's talk about that as a choice. I think it was a very good choice. It's interesting, the thing that's held against JD and Trump is that he had said in 2016 that he didn't like Donald Trump. Although, again, this is a fine people hoax, because if you go look at the exact wording of what JD said,
That's
they
not
cut
what he
it
said.
out. Yeah,
Correct. Yes, it was taken out of context.
Yeah, so he did say he wasn't a supporter of. He said, I don't support many of the policies of Donald Trump, is what he said. But how they took it was quite a long piece. It was about a 45-second clip or something, and the clip that's often played is about 15 seconds of that.
Which is what they usually do.
Yes.
So, but let's swing back to the substance rather than
Yes.
what the media thinks.
So you point out the family. There's that. What I find fascinating about it is the criticism of Trump by the mainstream. A lot of the criticism, there's so much, but a lot of the criticism has been a few things. One, he never served in the military. He's a coward. He had bone spurs, so he's a coward. Then he got given everything by his dad, and he didn't really work for it. He didn't study hard. He's not particularly smart. That's where that sort of rolls into. He's not smart. He's a gangster. He's a mafia type boss who manipulates and forces people to do things under threat and all of these types of things. Right? He's a racist. He hates anyone of color. So now you take JD and you put him on the ticket. Okay, he's never served his country. Well, he's a Marine, and he went to Afghanistan.
And the reason why he went into the Marines is because he was a teen when he saw the Twin Towers going down.
Yeah. All right. So he was one of those Americans who saw 9/11 happen and thought, I need to sort of serve my country. All right. So he's a Marine. Right. Then he's never made anything of himself. Well, no, not so much. He grows up in Appalachia in a very, very poor rural area. With a drunkard, drug-addled mom, raised by this crazy granny sort of figure who's not actually his grandmother, but is very strict. and tells him he needs to work hard, and he does. And he then goes to Yale, and then qualifies from Yale, and then goes into venture capital, makes a good amount of money for himself. So he is truly a self-made man and a clever guy. So that goes down by the wayside. And then, of course, he's racist, and you've already pointed out that sort of falls by the wayside as well. So I think it's a smart choice for that reason, in that it neutralizes all of the Trump points. I also think it's potentially a very good choice because JD Vance is 39 years old, and that gives a lot of legs to the kind of America First policy for the next 40 years, essentially, especially if Vance becomes president at some point. And then basically will be the same age as Obama when he leaves office of the presidency. So I think that, for those reasons, it was quite a good choice. In terms of him being critical of Trump, he was 31, 32 years old in very much East Coast circles from Yale when he understood that to be what Trump was and what he stood for. And he said, you grow up and you learn and you realize that narratives being fed to you aren't necessarily true. So I do think he'll be interesting. He's not Donald Trump. He does think differently on some things. I think he's more isolationist than Donald Trump. So I think the deep state should be even more worried because I think Donald Trump would more likely go to war than JD Vance. So if JD is in power at some point, I think you've got even less chance of America getting involved in conflicts. More, is there anything more you saw there?
So I think, the crucial thing that you and I have both touched on now is that, what came out of the RNC was the idea of a party that was very firmly on track, that had a very clear plan. There were lots of touch points that were completely unexpected. So on the one hand, you have Hulk Hogan pitching up on stage. Okay,
completely ridiculous.
Okay,
but hilarious.
Okay, and then you have Amber Rose, who pitches up and gives, and she goes through this entire process of explaining how she had believed that Trump was a racist, that Trump was a bigot, and all of this kind of thing. And then her father said to her, "Well, why don't you go and do your homework?" And she then talks about this personal journey that she made, where she went through all of those touch points and discovered that all of the stuff that she had been told by the mainstream media was, in fact, deliberately put in place to mislead her. Mm-hmm. And then she talks about actually meeting Trump and, having conversations in person. And this is something that I've spoken about frequently, that you can only judge the measure of a person when you're actually sitting across a table from them, making eye contact with them and getting a sense of what they're all about. And most of us, as human beings, we're very good at being able to judge how good people are based on the way in which we relate to them in those meetings. And so clearly, but you see, again, what was interesting in terms of that was that she so completely breaks the mold in terms of who the Republicans would traditionally have put up on stage. Because, the idea of having a single mother with a relatively checkered past, with tattoos and
well, she's a porn star. I mean, let's not hold back.
And piercings and so forth, and again, this was completely smacked down by Trump. He said, "No, you are going to recognize that this is not the Republican Party of the past. This is a Republican Party that is actually going to be far more, I hate to use this word inclusive, but, it's inclusive in the sense of not actually kowtowing to the religious fringe. Because, the Bible Belt did end up controlling the narrative around, what was meant to be said at the Republican Party.
And who gets to call themselves Republican.
Exactly. So I think all of these were touch points that meant that what came out of the RNC was actually an entirely different Republican Party to what we've known. And to the point in terms of selecting J.D. Vance, if Trump wins, and we need to get to that.
Yeah, we do need to get
at
to
some
that.
point. Okay, if Trump wins and Vance ends up becoming Veep, and then if he then ends up becoming the presidential candidate, it's going to set the tone for an entirely different Republican Party over the next couple of decades.
Yes, absolutely.
So now that then brings us back to the scenario, because remember what we were talking about last time round, where I was saying it was very clear from the debate that the cognitive decline on the part of Biden cannot be hidden anymore. But I also said that the Democrats have now boxed themselves into a corner. And the reason why they boxed themselves into a corner is because they put Kamala Harris in place on a DEI ticket.
Yes, so don't you want to go down into that dig into it a little bit? Because I've seen online people say when you say Kamala Harris is a DEI hire, that's racist. So do you just want to explain why it's not racist and why it's a true statement?
So the reason why it's a true statement is because remember that Kamala Harris got into the current position where she is without having any delegates in her support. So she's not elected into the place. Mm-hmm. Okay, so consider someone with the likes of Tulsi Gabbard, for example, actually had real delegates and pitched up at the Democratic National Convention, where Joe Biden was eventually shoehorned into the position. But she was not allowed to speak to the DNC.
Consider someone else. Don't go left field. Because
you see, the reason why I'm talking about Tulsi Gabbard is because Tulsi Gabbard, like Kamala Harris.
Because you like her gym videos, that's why.
No, Tulsi Gabbard, like Kamala Harris, is half Indian.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, you could have, just as a side point to exactly the point you're making, is you could have chosen Buttigieg, now called Booty Juice. You could have chosen him, a gay man. He actually polled quite well. He was probably going to beat Biden.
Yes.
Super Tuesday if they hadn't done a coup.
Look, Bernie Sanders would have beaten Biden.
Yes.
Look, let's be very clear about this. That if Bernie Sanders had been allowed to get to the forefront, then he would have been the Democrat candidate.
Yes. So exactly to your point. But then when Biden needed to choose a VP, he specifically stated it must be a woman and she must be a person of color.
Yes.
That's what he said. Those were the criteria. He didn't say, I want someone who's got a lot of merit, who's qualified in the following areas because this is where my weaknesses are. None of that was ever mentioned. His criteria for choosing this person was solely based on immutable characteristics of gender and race. That's all he cared about. And so he only had one choice of who was sort of around at the time, didn't
He could
he?
have chosen Elizabeth Warren because she's Native American. Isn't she?
It's what 1024th or something Native American.
But when you get down to it, we're all African.
Kanthan.
We all trace our ancestry to this continent. Come on.
Good. So as you correctly
So now
stated,
getting back to
they were boxed into this corner.
So they boxed into this corner. So now they have a situation. So as we are recording this, Joe Biden has not been seen in public.
Yes.
Okay, he has not been seen in public for a number of days now, and we have been shown a video of him purportedly emerging and boarding his aircraft.
Which doesn't look like him.
And there are a number of people have been fact-checking the video and pointing out that there are digital artifacts which look like it's potentially been essentially one of these cheap fakes that Karine Jean-Pierre is speaking about. Then people have also pointed out that his resignation letter was, again, on his personal letterhead. The signature that was on.
Okay, let's backtrack before you. Okay. Let's backtrack a little bit for those who may not have been following as closely as we do. So what happens is Trump, the assassination attempt, 48 hours later, you have the Republican National Convention. That ends then 4 days later. And then over the weekend, Sunday, which had been reported by Mark Halperin, I think it was, earlier in the week. He was the first guy to report that Biden would probably drop out on the Sunday. It seemed unlikely at that point because you had everyone from Congressional Black Caucus to Biden's aides to the head of his campaign to Biden himself in an interview with Lester Holt saying at NBC, saying, we're not going anywhere. All right. So that all happens in the week. Biden then allegedly gets COVID. And I don't buy that at all. Firstly, I mean, are we still believing COVID tests? I mean, have we not all learned our lesson here? But even there, Biden gets COVID and then needs to isolate. I mean, when is that? COVID's flu, folks. What are we doing? Like, what are we pretending? Anyway, he allegedly gets COVID. There's video of him when he gets off the plane in Delaware, getting into his vehicle, into the Beast, and it looks like he can't get into the car properly. His legs need to be lifted up by the Secret Service into the car. So he's very frail for whatever reason that is. He then disappears. Sunday, out comes a letter. He doesn't put it out through normal channels. He doesn't leak it to his usual suspects at AP or CNN or any of these other networks or news aggregators. He posts the letter to X. And that's it.
Where we all know that his social media account is not run by him directly.
Yes.
But it's actually run by a team.
Yeah, it's run by a team, and allegedly Jill Biden also has access. So this letter comes out. The letter is not on his stationery, which is not normal.
It's not on the presidential stationery.
No presidential stationery, no White House stationery. Just Joseph R. Biden written at the top. You could do it on your own computer at home. He then has a letter which basically says, the usual. It's a great honor to have been the president and to have been the nominee and to run a second time and all this.
More crucially, but he doesn't endorse anyone.
He doesn't. This is what's crucial. He specifically says he's giving up the nomination and that he will support the party, but he does not endorse anyone in that letter. And about 2 hours later, 90 minutes later, there's a second tweet from his account, which suddenly endorses Kamala Harris. Now, I find that complete. Oh, the one other thing about the letter is it's signed with a signature that he's never used before.
Yes.
So it says Joe Biden. It's his signature roughly, but it's underlined. He doesn't underline his signature, and there's like the N at the end. After the N, that looks like there's an S. So it actually reads Joe R. Biden's, and then it's underlined. So, and people have gone and got his signature off bills and things that he signed, and none of them match. So it's not like this is he sometimes uses his signature. It's a complete anomaly. What do you think happened there? And I'll tell you what I think.
So there have been a number of credible reports which and we'll drill down to this, but the essence of it, which summarized by Grok, which is of course the AI on X, and the summary was that President Joe Biden reportedly suffered an undisclosed medical emergency during his visit to Las Vegas, as indicated by multiple sources, including police officers and local news reports. The incident, which was not publicly disclosed, led to the cancellation of his events and a swift return to Delaware aboard Air Force One. There are varying claims regarding the nature of the emergency, with some suggesting it was a transient ischemic attack. You'll have to explain what that is because I'm not a doctor, but then neither are you. So,
no, I'm just a journalist.
Okay. Or a more severe condition requiring immediate medical attention. The White House has not officially confirmed the details of the incident, leading to speculation and concern about Biden's health and the transparency of his administration. So, we have that backdrop. Then we have a situation where we have a resignation letter that pops up on Twitter, of all places, followed a short while later by this...
a suspect letter.
Yeah. Let's take it at face value. What I'm trying to do is to just put the pieces on the table, and then we connect the dots later. Okay. So then we have, within a relatively short space of time, you have endorsements now pouring in for Kamala Harris. Now, ask yourself, who are the endorsements coming from? So the Clintons are very prompt to endorse Kamala Harris. Mm-hmm. Who does Pelosi endorse? Yeah. Pelosi jumps up immediately at that point. Who's missing from this scenario? It's Obama.
Yeah.
Okay. So now consider that there are two factions that effectively control the Democrats. There's the Clinton faction and there's the Obama faction. And anyone who thinks to the contrary actually needs their head read, because it's not Joe Biden who's in any way been controlling this party. These two factions have always been at loggerheads with each other. And look, to a large extent, they agree on matters of common cause, but obviously each of them has been jockeying for power in terms of controlling the destiny of the party. So my read of the scenario is that the departure was orchestrated by Obama. And the reason why I say this is because you suddenly end up with a scenario where George Clooney, Obama's close friend, suddenly ends up writing an op-ed for the New York Times entreating Joe Biden to step down. Now, the reason for that becomes very clear. He would not be doing that if he had not actually had the blessings of Obama to do it.
Yeah.
So we now get to the situation where the letter drops, and one would expect that we would then go to what you spoke about on our last show, about the idea of an open convention where Obama's faction, shall we say, would then be able to steer forward a candidate of their choosing, who might potentially have been a Michelle Obama, if we think about it. But suddenly you have the scenario where there's a tweet that comes out where Biden says that he's endorsing Kamala Harris, and then you have the Clintons stepping forward. Mm-hmm. And so suddenly now all of this is out in the open, and then suddenly you have donors who said that they were withdrawing their money from the Biden-Harris campaign, suddenly now stepping forward. And guess what? Within 24 hours, you have 100 million US that gets raised in support of Kamala Harris.
Yeah, 81.
Yeah.
81 million votes, $81 million.
It was 81 when it started, and it went up to over 100 million.
You know how that works, eh? You know there's laundering. You know what they do.
I know there's laundering. But again, let's focus on the pieces right now, because
okay, so can I give my slightly different
so before
take?
we go to that, so what I'm trying to say is that ahead of the Democrat National Convention now, you've already got Kamala sitting with an abundance of
she's got all the delegates
all of the delegates that are needed in order for her to become candidate for presidency. But again, a crucial thing that people must understand: this is not about whether or not Kamala Harris is capable of actually winning the election. It is about the fact that if she is not on the ticket, all of the money that was raised for the Biden-Harris campaign gets lost to the Democrat Party, and they cannot use it to then prop up all of the Congress race, the
House races and Senate races,
and the Senate races, which are going down at the same time. So those are all of the pieces of the puzzle. I think that there's a lot going on behind the scenes right now between the Obama factions and the Clinton faction. But I think crucially what they are trying to do is to try and work out how they can possibly stem any potential hemorrhaging that's going to happen in these elections. Because right now all of the polling shows that in nearly all of the congressional races, seats that were previously considered to be safe on the part of the Democrats are now actually being seriously threatened.
All right, so I want to I don't disagree with much of that. I do think, so it seems clear to me from everything I've read and listened to that everyone wanted Biden to step down. And that the reason for that was post the debate, it was quite clear that he was very likely to lose. Post the assassination, he was losing.
It was a certainty, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think the most of the pressure came actually from Nancy Pelosi, who still runs that entire party, certainly on a day-to-day. I agree with you on the Clintons and Obamas, but if you see them as the major shareholders, but rather see Nancy Pelosi as the sort of day-to-day CEO, COO type of person. And I mean, there was even a statement made. It wasn't by Nancy. It was one of the Democrats who said, look, you either listen to Nancy the easy way or things will get the hard way, and the hard way will be painful. That painful was the word used. So there was very clearly pressure from major people. So the Clooney thing was definitely Obama, who was pushing Biden to step down. And there was no doubt that Hillary was also pushing for Biden to step down. And then I think Nancy was the one who really made that happen. And that was the behind the scenes. Here's where I think the interesting part is. I think that all of them wanted to go to the convention. Obama released a tweet subsequent to the letter that Biden released, stepping down. And in that tweet, he says, the party must establish a process by which we elect the nominee. Okay, and that's what they wanted. They wanted to go to what essentially would be, inverted commas, an open convention.
Absolutely.
But actually not open at all. It would be pre-decided.
Yes.
Between two factions,
Which
probably.
all, yeah.
And then those two factions would fight it out. And ultimately, it would look like you had, inverted commas, again, democracy. And then you'd get a candidate. But it wouldn't have been Kamala, and it wouldn't have been, it could have been Kamala. But there would have been a fight. And it may very well have been someone like Michelle Obama, because she wipes out you're taking the black woman out the race, because, well, Kamala's not even...
Well, the money is a significant factor, John. Don't diss the money.
Well,
thing,
I do want to get to the money.
You've got literally hundreds of millions that have been committed
sure.
to that campaign. And the Democrats don't want to lose that.
I do want to get to the money. But I think what happened was that letter was forced, which is why I think the signature's fake. And it wasn't that Biden doesn't know. I don't think, the jokes that were made, he's going to be really cross when he finds out he dropped out. But I think there was a lot of fighting. Certainly, we know the close group of the Bidens is Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and Jill Biden. And that's been a lot of the in-circle decision-making has happened between those three people, especially in the last month. And I think that tweet that was sent out supporting Kamala was Jill Biden's middle finger. Because I think they forced Joe Biden out. Jill Biden has access to that account.
I think that's a good call.
And she was like, okay, you're going to screw over my husband. I'm going to screw over you. I know none of you want Kamala because she's a hard sell. Nobody wanted her. She couldn't even pick up a few votes in the primaries. She had to drop out before she lost her own state. So, this is she's a hard sell candidate, and they are going to hard sell her now, but it's just difficult. And so I think that's what's happened. And now they have no choice but to support Kamala because the sitting president.
But I don't think any of them expect her to win.
Well, there's a very interesting thing that's going on now, which is this hard sell that's happening. And it just in the last 2 days since the endorsement, essentially 2-3 days, we've got Donald Trump's too old to be the president, which is just hilarious because the guy who is the president, who I don't understand how he can not be the nominee because of issues, but he can be the president. Anyway, but so firstly, you've got he's too old. That's already a talking point now. Big talking point across all the networks. Then you've got Kamala is great. They're starting to canonize her as they do all their candidates. She's just a great person. She's great in every way. She's brilliant. She's smart. All these things. Then you've got the defense tactics. So if you point out that she got where her whole career got started by her having an affair with her boss and basically getting appointed into her position as a DA. In that way, you get attacked as a misogynist and all this other crap when that's just factual.
Look, I've said in the past, I don't care who people sleep with, and I've said this in the context of Jacob Zuma as well.
Yeah, but if you want to be president.
No,
and the way you climbed that ladder, it may matter to voters. If you're turning around and saying
absolutely right, but
women
voters,
I
think the crucial thing that we need to take a view on with regard to Kamala is not that she happens to be a woman of no moral standing, because we certainly know that JFK had a bit of a revolving door terms of
he had dalliances with women on basically a daily basis.
And that's certainly I would not use that as an objective standard for why I find Kamala Harris to be repulsive. I do find her to be repulsive in terms of the number of innocent black people that she kept in jail when she was Attorney General in California, and the stuff is actually well documented. Yeah. I do think that she should be held accountable in terms of the fact that she was delegated the responsibility for securing the nation's borders under under Joe Biden, and it ended up being a complete and utter disaster. And I've yet to see a single clip, and I challenge anyone to provide me with one, where Kamala Harris in any way sounds presidential at any level. And no matter what may think about Joe Biden, he certainly had, over the entire course of his career, an abundance of clips where you could say, well, Biden actually sounds presidential at this point. Harris has never had any of those clips.
She's a terrible candidate.
Yes.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Unburdened
by what has been.
I completely. We're both unburdened by what has been. And, I love school buses. I just need to say that. But I will say she can read a teleprompter very well.
Yes.
As you would expect her to be able to. And when she does stick to teleprompter, she gets closer to this problem you're pointing out.
And in her case, it'll be scripted by other people,
Yeah.
and she will stay on script.
It's the West Wing. It's Aaron Sorkin. Right. So that's where we are currently. We're at Kamala. However, it happened to come by, and we both have our theories on how that happened to occur. But certainly a lot of backroom stuff going on. Joe Biden still at this point hasn't really been seen. I also don't buy some video which looks very weird of him boarding an aircraft.
Well, he's purportedly meeting with Netanyahu today.
Yes.
Purportedly.
Yes. So let's see. I personally, I do think that will happen. I don't think Joe Biden's dead. I do think he's still around. I think what will happen is they do this sort of game where they let the conspiracy theories run wild, and then he just comes out and looks kind of okay, and they go, you see, you people are crazy.
What we're talking about right now isn't conspiracy as much as facts that have been reported from a number of individual sources.
Yes.
This doesn't mean that Joe Biden is dead, but, is it a fact that he has had an unscheduled medical emergency while he was in Las Vegas?
Sure.
There are multiple independent sources.
The transient ischemic attack you refer to, which is like colloquially called a mini stroke. So it's a stroke symptoms that usually resolve within a few hours and don't leave any lasting effect. But it's still abnormal.
They could be precursors to a full-blown stroke.
Absolutely. But outside of all of this,
ice cream day on top of that.
I am. Yeah, he stepped down on ice cream day. Hilarious. I am uncomfortable because again, some people who are much more interested when we do a South African politics show, may be saying, "Why is this? Who cares, guys?" And the reason I care, and the reason I'm also concerned that this man is currently the president of the United States, is that a lot of stuff that goes on in the world is dependent on what gets decided in that little house they call the White House. And it matters. It matters that we're probably closer to nuclear weaponry use. I'm not going to say nuclear Armageddon. I don't really buy that anyway as a theory. But we're closer to nuclear weapons being used than we've been since the 60s. There are escalating conflicts everywhere in the world. The Israelis, the Houthis sent a drone to Tel Aviv, and the Israelis responded by bombing the hell out of an oil port in Yemen. There are escalating conflicts all over the show. There are problems in the world. There is hyperinflation. Let's not call it hyperinflation. It's not hyperinflation, but there's inflation that has caused, inverted commas, a cost of living crisis, which is making the peasants very upset, as the elites would look at it. These are all issues that need to be dealt with because they're all pots that are starting to boil. And to have someone in the White House, whether I agree with their policies in general or not, but who is not in control of their faculties and is not looking at all of these things and going, there are problems all over the show and I need to attend to these problems in the way I think is best, is very concerning, especially when the problems are things like nukes and, potentially full-blown war in the Middle East and not being able to ship things through normal shipping lanes. These are of major concern, and the idea that this man is in charge of things when it's very clear to everyone that he's not in control of his faculties is just really concerning, and that's why this matters so much.
unelected officials behind the scenes as puppeteers.
Yes, and being told that we must save democracy by making sure that Donald Trump doesn't become.
Well, they could start off by saving democracy by having an open convention at the DNC.
They could do that indeed. So, yeah. Look, that is really where the concern is. All right. So where's this going, Kanthan?
So where this is going right now is that if you look in terms of nearly all of the polling that's going down right now, you'll have fluctuation in terms of the range, but there is no poll that currently shows the possibility of Kamala Harris coming close to winning the election.
Yeah.
Certainly, all of the betting houses, which are normally a good indication, make it very clear that she doesn't have a hope in hell of actually getting up there. So now we need to look at what is at stake coming up in terms of the elections in November. And, one of the questions that was raised is, what's the possibility that Trump will end up losing based on the fact that there are, various shenanigans along the lines of what happened last time around. Now, look, you and I have spoken about the 2020 elections in the past, and I told you that I was very clear that the election was stolen, but the election was stolen legally, which means that Trump did not have a leg to stand on. So, which meant that Biden was the duly elected president. The ways in which that the elections were stolen legally is that there were a handful of swing cities, and we spoke about this.
Counties, even.
Yeah, of counties, effectively, that ended up swinging votes for the entire state. So even though the entire state had voted overwhelmingly for the Republicans, these particular counties, which are all, by the way, run by corrupt black Democrats. And we say they're corrupt because of the fact that they become personally enriched to the detriment of living standards in the cities that they happen to live in. There was widespread fraud on the basis of mail-in votes because of the fact that there was no matching signature requirements that were required to see whether those ballots were in fact valid or not. So there were a range of these things that were in place. This time around, the Republicans have actually been preemptively going out and doing exactly the same thing that the Democrats did last time around. So they've been encouraging mail-in voting on the part of their support base. They've spent a lot of time and effort on deploying resources to all of these counties to ensure that a far greater sense of election monitoring is in place than happened previously. There was a very significant Arizona Supreme Court decision, because you might remember that Maricopa County in Arizona was one of the places where there was clear evidence of fraud. Arizona, by the way, is one of those states that actually requires ID verification for local elections, but does not require ID verification for national elections. So there was a strong possibility that they were going to get away with it again in Arizona, but the Arizona High Court has now said, no, absolutely, you need to ensure that there's ID verification. So the opportunities for blatant cheating has happened.
Although Wisconsin ruled in favor of drop boxes.
Yes.
So Wisconsin will still have places where you can just throw 3,000 ballots in a box as an individual.
Absolutely. But at the same time, there's going to be greater surveillance on those boxes this time round. So I'm saying that the overall chances of being able to be as blatantly fraudulent as they were in the 2020 elections, and again, I'm making the point, it was blatantly fraudulent, but it was legal in the sense that
because of COVID, they got to do mail-in voting as one.
Yes, but also
with a lot of rules retracted.
Yes, but also because the rules in voting are made by the counties. If the county says it's okay, that makes it legal. So even if there has been
And it's what I said, which is that you can challenge things, but elections are contemporaneous.
Yes.
So once a winner is announced, you maybe have 12 to 24 hours to reverse that.
Yes.
If you don't do that within the first 24 hours after the announcement, it's done.
Right.
It doesn't matter whether it was fair or not. Please go back to the 2002 election of Robert Mugabe. Very obviously a stolen election. Very obviously bullshit. The reality is, who was president? Robert Mugabe. Why? Because once you announce a winner, people go, whether they think it's fair or not, they generally come to terms with that, they accept it, and they move on. And that's that. Even in America, that's what happened. In the days that followed that election, there was a lot of talk about all of this stuff. And the burst pipe at 3 a.m., the sudden jump in that graph, the changes in vote numbers on live television, all of these things were discussed. But the problem is that at the end of the day, they are very, very contemporaneous things. And once you've announced a winner, it is very, very, very difficult to reverse that.
Which is why Trump was so angry with his vice president.
He was so angry, why he made that telephone call to the governor of Georgia and said, you need to find the votes. It wasn't an appeal to faking the votes. It was his understanding that he had been screwed over.
Yes.
And that those votes existed, but simply had not been counted in his favor. Anyway, look. As far as I'm concerned, there's been a question which pertains to what we discussed today. You put out a call on social media. The question is, what's the deep state likely to do or could do in the run-up?
So I think now the chances of actually taking out Trump, so, clearly the assassination attempt failed. Taking out Trump at this point is going to be on the question of lawfare. But again, the Supreme Court...
the lawfare is done.
Yeah, the Supreme Court was very clear that you need to prove that it was outside of his duties as president, and that's going to be really difficult for them to.
The lawfare is done before November. Now, he may. So there were 4 cases, main cases against Trump. There were 2 sub cases. So the 2 sub cases was the one where they said he defrauded the bank. We've discussed that before. He didn't defraud anyone, but it was a court case in New York, and they hate Trump, so they found against him, and then ordered him to pay a ridiculous amount of money. So that's still around, but one imagines. It won't affect the election. The other one was the one where the woman accused him of raping her. She can't remember the day, the store. She can't remember any of the details. Again, in front of a jury, it wasn't a criminal trial. It was a
civil trial.
A civil trial. Mm-hmm. And so the
reason why it was a civil trial is because there was no evidence to actually bring it to a criminal case.
Yes, none. None. When I say she can't remember any of the vital details, she cannot remember any of the vital details. She's a crazy person who said Donald Trump raped me and it should have been thrown out. But again, if I assemble 10 of your enemies and ask them to adjudicate whether you did something bad, the chances are they will find you did something bad. So there's that case, but none of those really have an effect. Those are just more media things where they, you'll see now it repeated. Donald Trump was, they can't say convicted of rape because it wasn't a criminal trial. They have to say found liable for sexual assault is what you'll hear them repeating, although Biden had called Donald Trump a racist in the past months. So those ones will go away. The other 4 are either completely gone or are delayed. So the one that's gone is the best case they had against him, which is the confidential documents case in Florida. Because of the recent Supreme Court ruling, the judge in Florida has thrown out that case. That will now go to appeal, but none of the stuff will happen before the elections. The other cases, the prosecutor in Georgia slept with her colleague who was also prosecuting the case, so that's now on an ethics complaint, and that's not going to happen before the election. So all of the lawfare has failed. Look, I think there's going to be a media blitz in which Kamala is going to be raised up as something she obviously isn't. Will it work? Probably not, because becoming president of the United States involves a lot of campaigning. and you actually have to go meet people, and you have to give.
She also has to face Donald Trump in a debate.
I don't think you should give it a debate, but let me get there. So she's got to go around the country. She's got to actually interact with people. And I think that she is not good at that. She's good at reading a teleprompter. And if she's got a good speech on that teleprompter.
Well, that's why I think Trump will take the debate, because she doesn't have a teleprompter there.
Perhaps. But she will be prepared and actually remember her preparation far better. But look.
So she will be unburdened by what has been.
She will be unburdened by what has been. So look, the polls are going to tighten. That's 100%. The polls will tighten, and I think they will tighten quite close. And I actually think that in some states where Trump was winning, but they were traditionally blue or they lean blue, those states will flip back to her, at least in the polling. What happens before November? I don't put it. I don't put out.
I think a lot of that is going to be depending on who her vice presidential candidate is.
Sure, but I think her vice presidential candidate will actually be strong regardless of who it is. So it's either going to be Josh, I forget his name, but they're thinking of not including him because he's Jewish. So they're going to upset the Hamas people. So he's the governor in Pennsylvania, or Andy Beshear, who's the governor in Kentucky, I think it is. So there's a lot of potential good candidates, and Gavin Newsom is another one that they might throw on there, although I think he will refuse to be. I think he's looking to 2028. The point is I think that she will have a strong VP candidate, and I think that will buoy her quite a lot. But there's also a lot of the chatter that I've seen is, the typical Democrat way of voting, blue no matter who. So it doesn't matter that it's Kamala. It doesn't matter that she's incompetent. It doesn't matter that she's a fool. None of these things matter. It's blue no matter who. And of course, Donald Trump, as we know, is an existential threat to democracy. So we cannot possibly elect him. I don't also rule out another attempt on his life, frankly. I think if they tried once, they'll try again. That's my personal opinion, because I don't believe that. I think I buy the single shooter. I don't buy the single shooter under his own influence. But so I think there could be a lot of interest. Look, we have 10 days we've spoken about in this podcast. So we've chatted for an hour and a half or more, and we've just spoken about 10 days. We've spoken about the Trump assassination. We've spoken about Biden stepping down as the nominee and Kamala being raised up as the new nominee, and what might happen sort of in the next 6 months. But that's 10 days. That's 10 days.
So interesting thing that, with regard to your saying that they'll vote blue no matter who.
Yeah.
A more interesting study that came out in the past couple of days showed that married men overwhelmingly are going to vote Republican.
Yep.
Married women overwhelmingly are going to vote Republican.
Yes.
Single men overwhelmingly are going to vote Republican.
Although closer, 52, I think, percent it was, yeah.
But single women are overwhelmingly going to vote Democrat.
When you say overwhelmingly, it's actually mad. It's a bigger number than all the others combined.
Correct.
And as a percentage, it's 68%
Absolutely, yeah.
of single
It's
women
fascinating.
will vote Democrat.
Mm-hmm. But I also need to point out that over the course of these 10 days, what has been happening behind the scenes, well, as you pointed out, that Israel retaliated by bombing Yemen. And I still need to drill down into the logistics of that, because clearly they would have needed to fly in international airspace.
Saudi. The Saudis, I'm pretty sure the Saudis had a role to play there.
Well, I don't know about the logistics at this point. And it'll be interesting if the Saudis did allow them to overfly. I don't know the answer to that yet. I haven't drilled down to it, but it was significant because it was a fuck around and find out moment for Yemen. But more interestingly, against that same backdrop, there's now been a Saudi-brokered accord between the Houthis and the Yemen government, where they've each promised to stand down at some level. So let's see where that ends up going. The second thing is that while this has been happening, the Chinese have brokered a get-together of all of the Palestinian leaders, including Hamas. So they pulled in all of the leadership from the West Bank and from Gaza, and have gotten them to sign an accord of sorts. And again, this speaks to the fact that Biden has been completely absent. Because, in terms of historically the U.S.'s strategic interest in that part of the world, you could not imagine a scenario where this type of thing would have taken place under a Trump administration.
Yeah.
So, there would have been, Trump would have been at the forefront of that, and he would probably have involved the Saudis in terms of being involved in having these discussions and so forth. But yeah, it's fascinating. Again, over the past 10 days, Trump has had discussions with Zelensky.
Yes, so this I wanted to point out. So this is very interesting. So Zelensky, after a year and a half, is it longer? Is a year and a half? About how long has this war been going? 2 and a half years.
It's 2.5 years. Yes.
So after 2.5 years of saying no surrender under any circumstances, war until we win all of our territory back and push Russia back into Russia and defeat Russia, etc., suddenly comes out this week and says we must find an end to this war.
Yes,
which is the first time he's made any kind of comment like that since. There was meant to be a treaty which was scuppered by Boris Johnson under the instruction of the Biden administration. I would say Joe Biden, but I'm not sure he's instructed anything in his entire term. So that is an interesting change. Now, I'm not sure whether that's being driven by Trump or whether that's being driven by the Democrats.
Well, I certainly think that the discussion that Trump would have had with Zelensky would have made it clear that if he were to come into power, then the taps are going to be turned off. And that Zelensky now needs to be thinking very seriously
about winding this down.
And you look, certainly from Zelensky's point of view, there's every incentive on his part to do that if the taps are turned off, because then he's able to escape the country. We know that he's got mansions in Florida, he's got mansions out in Switzerland that have all been built on the back of.
He's laundered a lot of the money.
He's laundered a lot of the money. So he's. He'll get away from 500,000 dead Ukrainians, but he doesn't really care about that because he is a native Russian speaker in any case. But but putting that aside, at the same time, and again, we're talking about this 10-day period. There was a significant hit on the part of the Russians against Odessa, where they took out British SAS units. And the figures in terms of the number of people that were taken out, but these were SAS operatives on the ground in Odessa, and so even though purportedly the UK has no direct involvement in this war, it's very clear that there actually were people on the ground. Same time, you had a military advisor who suddenly mysteriously drops dead in Kiev. And of course, against that backdrop as well, you've got Keir Starmer, who's now in office. His country is burning. If you've seen the stuff that's going down in Leeds, but at the same time, he says that no Russian ship will be allowed to traverse these waters carrying illegal oil, and we shall stop them at any cost. So there's a lot that's going on
at any cost. Third World War, because if you were to open fire on a Russian oil vessel, Putin would probably view that as an act of war.
Sure, but meanwhile, you can't actually control rioters, in your own backyard. So it's all fascinating stuff, and I think to a large extent, right now, the extent to which the future of the world hinges on this U.S. presidential election, I don't think people should underestimate it.
Absolutely.
And no matter what you may think about Trump, I think Trump brings certainty that has been absent from for the longest time from U.S. politics, because certainly in terms of his policy objectives and so forth, it's very clear that he's not in favor of forever wars. He is in favor of closing the taps on Ukraine. He is very much in favor of ramping up a trade war, certainly with the Chinese, to the extent of wanting to bring jobs, manufacturing jobs, back to the U.S., and at the same time ramping up in terms of tariffs. And by the way, the tariffs argument is something that we should probably investigate at some point, because I think that there's logic to what he's actually saying.
I do too, and I have for years.
Yes.
Considered tariffs to be completely sensible.
Yes.
And I know the free trade people lose their minds over that. So it's a broader discussion for a longer podcast to discuss why I'm both in favor of free trade and believe that tariffs, as Trump proposes them, are in fact free trade. So it's a complex discussion. All right, good. Look, the only thing I'd say on top of that is just to bring it home, which is, in South Africa, if you are discovering our podcast, which is what I was saying about people, what they think in the beginning, why I think that is important. It matters what people think because narratives are directed by large groups of thinking. So what people generally think, South Africa, let's use the example. They think Cyril Ramaphosa is a better man than Jacob Zuma. So they feel more comfortable with Cyril at the head of the government than they would with Jacob Zuma. What's that being driven by? Is it being driven by real truth on the ground? My perspective, no. I don't think either of the men is better than the other. They both have deep, deep flaws and deep problems. But the narrative that's been driven amongst at least 50 plus 1% of the population is Cyril is the good guy, Jacob's the bad guy. As far as the American situation goes, obviously Trump is the devil in a South African context. That's the narrative on the ground here. And that's simply not true, obviously. And when I've sort of reached, so the assassination for me, was a bit of a turning point in not really putting up with people's nonsense about Trump anymore. I've generally kind of just said whatever, like believe what you want to believe. But the other day I actually ended up in a vehicle. I took my car for service. You wait for a car to come and take you somewhere. So it was myself and another guy and the driver, and the conversation. I didn't bring it up. It was the Monday after the assassination, and that conversation got brought up. And the one guy who is a professional in Sandton, I only know that because we ended up dropping him off in Sandton at a big firm, brought it up and made a big point about how terrible Trump is. And I turned around and said, why? He couldn't answer the question. He could give me sort of, media talking points. But when I said, sorry, can you no, he's a bad person. When I said, okay, can I just ask for one specific, what specifically it makes him bad? And I don't really care for his personal life. Like, if you're going to tell me he slept with a porn star, I don't care. Like, as you point out about Kamala, you don't really care about that. I don't particularly care about that detail in Trump's history. Not that I believe it necessarily, but it's irrelevant. What about him? And when you start drilling down, so I'm not tolerating that anymore. If people say something that I know to be untrue, I'm going to ask them for a specific. And when they come up with a specific that is a hoax, like he was installed by Russia, or he said they're very fine people on both sides with regards to Nazis, or he said that he was happy for soldiers to die, his own soldiers to die, that hoax by the Washington Post, or any of the multiple hoaxes about him, I'm just going to challenge that now. But what I think is important for us to understand is, because America is such a hegemony of power in the world, and you can choose. We've had this discussion about BRICS and where that may lead to, and removing some of that hegemony from the United States, and why that might be good in some respects. But as it stands, America has a lot of power and a lot of control and a lot of influence in the world. And so that means that when America does things, it has an effect on us, on this little southern tip of Africa. And so I look at it and go, I know that with Donald Trump in power, some things will be better for us and some things will be worse. The rand-dollar exchange rate will probably be a bit worse. Okay, but we've got a stable government, so maybe it won't be that bad. Maybe we'll be a good emerging market.
I think our energy policy will be a lot better if Trump is in power.
So exactly. So our energy policy, I want to get to, even if our energy policy doesn't change, I know that the price of fuel
will come down.
Will drop. And I know that if I can put in an extra 5 liters in my tank for what it costs me today to put in that fuel, then that makes a difference in my life, and it's going to make a difference in everyone's life. It's just a simple thing like that. I know that if there's generally peace in the world, that makes the world as a whole more stable. In other words, if the Ukraine-Russia war ends, if the conflict in the Middle East ends, if there's shipping that is able to run through the Suez Canal freely without the risk of hijackings and boats being fired upon, I know that makes the world more stable, which means that logistics just work better. Everything just functions better. When systems work better, life as a whole for everyone on the planet is usually better. And so if you want an argument for why on the southern tip of Africa I should care, or why I should be supporting a Trump presidency versus what we've had over the last 4 years, which creates chaos in the world, that for me is the answer. Don't know if you've got anything to add.
No, I just want to make the point that everyone should be aware of, is that at the end of the day, all wars are trade wars.
Good. Right. Thank you, Kanthan. I think that's enough for this week. I do want to acknowledge we got some other questions. A question about Pala Pala, which we'll get to. A question about immigration, illegal immigration, whether it's just how things happen or whether it's planned. I think we must get to that as well on a future show. So we will get to that. And also a very interesting question around people returning to South Africa and the image of South Africa, and whether it's as bad as everyone says or as good as other people say. Hashtag I'm staying. Remember that propaganda campaign from several years ago. I think that's a very interesting question as well. So we will get to those. Thank you for asking them to the people who did. If you do want to interact with the show, that's probably not a bad way to do it. Contact one of us on social media. At Kanthan Pillay. I'm the acclaimed journalist on X. And as always, if you've got a complaint, if you didn't like the show, you disagree with something,
just leave it in the comments.
Well, Kanthan might read the comments. I don't. But also, the best thing to do is to like and subscribe, because that automatically will get the complaints department to get back to you immediately. So I think that's the best method. Thank you so much for watching or listening. Kanthan, that's all.
2 weeks' time. Cheers.
We'll catch you next time. Goodbye.